So yes, Raheem, I think that the promise of these new technologies, you know, the capabilities of these new technologies is really something that we should take on board and start looking at it. And, you know, again, sorry guys, I'm coming back to the cities again, but, you know, if you look at these sort of networks, what they can do to cities, you know, you create that whole IoT system throughout the city. It's just absolutely amazing. You know, we heard Amanda talking about the importance of data. Yeah, if you start creating data and you start creating that in a citywide network, you know, then obviously you really have a fantastic sort of tool to work with. Coming back to actually what Phill was talking about this morning, so just one step back for a moment, back from the technology, because the technology is the enabler, the technology is the tool, but it's us, the people, you know, that we have to take on board. It's us, the people, who have to do it. You know, as Phill said, you know, we have to make the future, yeah? It's not the future is waiting for us. No, if we don't make it, it won't be there, yeah? It's us, yeah? So it's not something that's upon us, that's something we do, yeah? It's an activity. And in being that activity, there are a lot of elements that we need to take into account. And that's actually what this panel is going to talk about with you this morning. So what I would like to do is to ask the three panelists to talk about a little bit about their perspective. So where are they coming from within the context of what we are talking about? So what are their views on that? And then also, you know, bring into that your own experience, you know, from different sort of sectors that you're coming from, which are very important and very different again. Not everybody is a technology nerd, yeah? So we have to take that into, definitely take into account. So Phill, Barry, and Julie will start this discussion. So perhaps, Julie, can you start and give your views a little bit, or your opinion, your background, your feeling, you know, what's your touch and feel about all of this?
Yeah, so my name is Julie Fedele and I'm from Bupa, Australia, so the health insurance arm of that business. So it's really interesting hearing Phil's watch and listen advice, because particularly in our health insurance industry, we're finding that, you know, we're highly regulated, it is a declining marketplace, and our secret sauce is our people. So how might we change the way we recruit and who we recruit, and how we help our people feel confident about the future of health insurance and how our customers want to interact with us? And a key component of that is getting a lot of our workforce to be comfortable with having health and care conversations.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, really interesting.
Barry, can you give your opinion on this?
Barry Fitzgerald, Roy Hill Holdings. I sort of come from an industry which has got lots of people who are traditionally operators and perhaps not as highly educated as sort of lots of you folks in the audience. And one of the things I make about, and Phill mentioned about how you sort of need to make the future, an observation I'd make as a leader of industry, particularly depending on what your workforce is you not only have a responsibility to future-proof your industry, but you actually have a responsibility to future-proof employees. And I think that really means that you need to take the time out and sort of try to start raising the discussion with them about what their future might be. You know, we're looking at displacing, you know, autonomous trucks, displacing a lot of operators. And I think we owe it to them about sort of trying to get them to work out where they're going to go and how they're going to fit in with what the industry and what the future holds. So I think there's a responsibility not only to their business, but also to our employees in future-proofing.
I think that's a really good point. And Phill, you mentioned that one of the things is that obviously there is a fear amongst people about failing, yeah? Not just in business, but also, you know, in situations where Barry is talking about. What's your...
Yeah, so there's this conversation around the need for a fail-fast mentality. Because everyone in this room knows that there are business trends, really, like things that are like cool and fun to talk about. And if it was Jim Collins, it was going from good to great, then it was Drucker's excellence, and then it's, you know, thankfully, Brene Brown's era of authenticity at work. And that created space for this conversation of failure. And then you've got the rise of kind of, you know, Silicon Valley, large, like startup, let's go fast, 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 fast. You can't go fast without an appetite for growth. I think the conversation around failure is a little bit misplaced. Would you agree? Because if anybody asks you about like, well, what's your philosophy on failure? If somebody says, hey, Phil, what's your philosophy on failure? I said, don't do it. I mean, because my preference is not fail. How about that? Like, but everybody's so obsessed with failing and failing fast. The problem with failing fast is that if it is only failure in isolation of reflection and feedback, then it's just called you suck. And it's very different from like rapid growth. Does that make sense? So if all you give to your teams, if all the conversation is, guys, we've got to fail fast, and you don't have an appetite for like a vicious, insatiable growth appetite, everything that Carol Dwecker's schooling us on, and if you don't know what a growth mindset is, basically it's the distinguishment between whether you think that you have a fixed allocation of finite intellectual capacity, or the reality, which is where we need our workforces to be, is that they're massively capable of evolution and change. So we can't just talk about failure, we've got to talk about growth.
But what about, you know, Barry, if you start looking, so you're typically talking about business failures, of course, yeah? But also I can see a similar sort of situation within employees, you know? I mean, you know, the fear of to fail in this new big world that you create for your company, yeah? And how do you see that?
Well, I think my comment would be is that I think the first thing is that in a company such as ours, fear of failure is an interesting one. I don't think change and innovation in our industry is necessarily all the big bang stuff, such as autonomous trucks. I think the issue about innovation and change in our environment is much more along a whole range of issues. And in that regard, this issue about fear of failure, I'd much prefer to think about fear of failure to think rather than failure per se. I mean, a failure where you don't think is just awful.
Yeah.
I mean, if you fail after you've thought it through and done your best, then that's fine. I mean, as long as you make the decision on the best available information, that's fine. But this idea that you can fail and it's okay if you've actually got sloppy thought processes, I think is a real problem.
That's right.
Julie, another thing, if you talk about healthcare, I mean, this is one of the biggest problems, you know, as Phill is saying, you know, look what the problem areas is and then try find solutions. Then you're already on the right path to the future, yeah? Now, healthcare obviously is a big sort of issue, and also then, of course, technology in healthcare and people looking after themselves and telehealth and telemedicine, etc., etc. I think companies such as you could play a key role in actually helping that sort of developments moving in that sort of into the future. What's your
so we certainly, I guess where we start with is the customer. So understanding what our customers want from us and how they want to interact with us. And although we love the idea of telehealth, and we're certainly investing in telehealth and telemedicine in terms of from a rural perspective, lots of our customers are telling us that from a face-to-face point of view, when they have conversations around, I have cancer, or my child has passed away, what do I do? And how do I sort out all of these receipts that I'm getting from the hospital? For us, it's about how do we craft those conversations and support our people to have those conversations. So I think in our industry, our true innovation is how to have human connection and really understand the needs of who we're talking to and focus on them as an individual.
And you know, you hit the nail. I think we talked about the flat earth and the populism that we see around us, you know. We need to take people with us, you know. We obviously, you know, we as a society have done something wrong, because otherwise populism wouldn't be that big around the Western world, yeah? So you want to say something about it?
Yeah, there's an interesting thought there. I mean, a part of my work, I host for Microsoft their global graduate program. So you've got 2,000 of the world's like brightest and best and potentially the most aggressive as far as career aspiration, their desire for impact on the planet. And our hiring policy over the last 5 to 6 years has dramatically shifted out of technical expertise, which is easy to get. If you've got a growth mindset, like give me 30 days and I'll get good at stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. But the harder thing to navigate is self-awareness, social impact, because the difference between talent and impact is huge. Because again, apologies for being a little bit kind of like crass, but we all know people who are extraordinarily talented but leave trails of human destruction behind them. So here's my talent, but here's my impact. I think what's going to be more important for business, to loop back into Barry's thoughts, is not so much just the advent of technology and where that's going to lead us, but how it moves the middle, which is Julie's conversation about, cool, here's this icing on the cake stuff, but here's the middle of the masses. I used to giggle on the television where they had reading and writing hotline. I know this is a silly one, but even when I was 10 or 12, they go, here's the reading and writing hotline, just call this number. And I'm like, people can't read it.
Yeah.
I know that kind of sounds ridiculous, but what we are trying to do is move the middle. How do we create the most benefit for the most people? And so from a talent perspective, people need to be far more human than ever before. The future of business is going to be tech-enabled, but we'll be obsessed with what is it that makes us most human, because anything that we don't have to compete with technology on is the smartest thing to double down on.
Yeah, and we certainly, and I could talk about this all day, because we, particularly at the executive table, when we talk about, it's a concept called humanising the customer experience. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but some of our executives, you know, a few years ago, it was quite intimidating to concierge in one of our stores, or get on the phones and ask a customer how they are. So it's not about you having to be expert in the product, because they're ridiculously complex, and so is the industry. But if you ask someone when they tell you something about their story, are you okay? It is so much more impactful, and it actually takes a lot of courage to ask that question and listen. So, I mean, certainly in our future recruitment processes, which we're trialling right now, it is about resilience and about a high care personality. And adaptability to change, and that's different from what we've recruited for before.
I think that's also in line with what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add a comment on that. It's sort of interesting. We're in the mining industry, and traditionally in the mining industry, it's seen as fairly high barriers of entry. And we're actually out there at the moment sort of specifically advertising for people with no mining experience required. But not only that, we are recruiting primarily on values. And so our whole performance review system is now based around team behaviours, personal behaviours, which is 50% of the thing. But our primary employment criteria is now getting to the point of experience, yes, but if you don't have the right values and sort of our values of lead, care, think, perform, which translate into a number of characteristics, then you really don't get to the point. And it's interesting because I call it that we want a monoculture, which is really strange in a world of diversity, but actually we want this culture really engaged, out there thinking people, proactive, resilient, rather than other views of diversity.
Okay, now coming back to Connect Expo, how can technology help in these human elements? So keep it human, but how can technology help you?
Well, certainly in our face-to-face environment, which supports the conversation. So currently our people are having to scramble between a variety of those beautiful black and green screens, which are quite old, and not focus on what you're saying, because I'm trying to think about and preempt the next screen I have to open. You know, with a really robust CRM system, we're going to be able to just focus on the customer and have a value-based conversation and let it navigate where it needs to go, rather than thinking about what screen I have to open next. So it's an enabler, and it's a key supporter in how we interact with customers.
And Barry, in your situation,
I think the technology in ours is clearly lots of stuff in terms of making data more accessible, helping people in the field. We currently use drones every morning we live stream a video of the mine as it lays out in the morning, because we have a remote operations centre 1,000 kilometres away. So every morning they see what the mine looks like. So it reinforces the connectivity between the people in Perth controlling the operation and the people on site doing it. So I think this value of data and accessibility to data information is probably the biggest one that they're going to do to change their roles in the way they adopt it.
Talking about data, you know, this is of course a fantastic example, Barry. On the other side, coming back to the human sort of element, you know, there's already this fear out in the market. Oh my God, yeah. Comment, Phill. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's like having your foot on the brake and the gas at the exact same time. I think that's how people feel about the future of technology, or at least I do. And as somebody who thinks about it very, very, very regularly, but through the lens of kind of myth and religion and faith and like the mass movements of humanity, like it really is kind of mythical times. And I think people have an equal dose of inspiration and intimidation. Does anybody feel like that sometimes? Sometimes like some of the tech like lights you up, and some of the time you're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with that. I think we don't have to rush to judgment calls, because in the way that you opened this morning, which I thought was terrific, was this notion of, you know, sometimes things don't go exactly as they plan. I mean, it was 1994 that Bill Gates said, don't worry, the internet's not going to be a thing. And then in 95, Windows shipped with Internet Explorer and changed the whole world. So sometimes the things that we think are going to happen don't. The things that we can't see are the things that change everything. So this notion of foot on the gas, foot on the brake, I think if we can hold the nerve, but in the meantime, do all that we can to become agile, which is just nerdy business language for like being prepared to learn and change, and knowing that we can if we want. I think that's the most important thing right now.
Yeah. Some last comments from you guys, you know, so coming back to the future, you know, so we're talking about the future. So I think it's very clear that the human element is going to overrule anything what we do. You know, technology will never be able to overrule us, yeah? Even if, you know, the robots and artificial intelligence are coming in, yeah, it's still us, you know, who have to make a decision about it and things like that, yeah? But so looking at your own businesses and the market that you're in and the people that you're dealing with, yeah? So in your situation, healthcare and patients and your staff that's working there. Now, I know it's difficult to do, but you know, 10 years or 20 years, let's not say 5 years, that's too difficult, but 10 years, 20 years, you know, what sort of ideas do you think of the future in context of your company and what you're working with?
That's a really good question. I could get in trouble for some of the answers. I'll dream big.
Take off the Bupa badge.
Yeah, I'll take off the Bupa badge. I certainly think in 10 years there'll be a lot more collaboration, to Phil's point, and we'll be co-creating products and services with customers that are unique and bespoke, and I think that's probably 5 years away.
Personalisation.
Yeah, and personalisation is a big theme, and we hear about it all the time. But I reframe it in it's the right personalisation for you. It's not creepy. I trust it, because sometimes some of this personalisation stuff's a bit creepy, and we're like, whoa, that's a bit too much for me. And so I think, you know, around getting people together who want to help fund other people's health. So, you know, your health bank account, but it's funded by an individual who wants to invest in someone else's health. Or, you know, you open up your own health bank account and you invest money and you get interest for that, and then you can draw on your own health bank account. This already exists in other countries in its infancy, but I sincerely believe with the amount of expenditure in healthcare, and we all know it's not sustainable, so we have to think completely different, and our frame of reference just needs to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. Barry?
Well, I'm not going to go and say that the iron ore mining industry won't exist, so let's assume that whether that's right or wrong, I'm going to stick with that. So on that basis, I think there'll be an enormous amount of technology in terms of selective mining. At the moment, mining is relatively, when you get to interfaces, you get a lot of waste, and that creates the grades lower. So I think there'll be a huge amount of data into making mining more selective. I think that the technology in terms of the equipment and the processing plants will become much more autonomous, much more independent, probably much smaller, getting back to more selective mining, particularly in iron ore. And I think sort of the concepts of, just the integrated supply chain back to suppliers will change enormously from what we do. So I think we'll be much more connected back into our supply chain. And just as an observation, we as a business are trying to design our business around our 5 key systems of supply, demand, innovation, governance and people. And so we're actually getting away from the silos of mining, processing. And I think there's going to be lots of changes like that, because that supply and demand goes from your suppliers, contractors, right through to your customers.
Yeah, it comes back to collaboration we already mentioned several times. I think that is a key to
very much
sustainable society that we're building. Phill, you get the last word.
Thank you.
But I'll keep an eye on your time.
Okay, good. How long have you got? I mean, when I think about the future, there are concerns as well. I worry about humans becoming more capable but less intelligent. And there's a good distinction there. I think people are confused in regards to the services that we have, and they think that Facebook is free, for instance. But people are paying a price, and the price is data tracking. And what large organisations are going to do with that, I think there's a very critical question for us to be thinking about right now, and our level of participation.
Now America, they've taken that privacy rule away, yeah? So
yeah, and Cambridge Analytics, and some of you guys know about this stuff. So what I think about, from a learning and development perspective, is that really the decisions that we're making now are going to shape the future for, well, very personally, for my daughter. So I want to do everything that I can to help kind of steer some stuff to create a place where a lot of people aren't displaced. Because the reality of technology is that it improves the lot of humanity, but often it comes at the expense of individuals in times of transition. Yeah. And so we should be smart enough to be able to manage that transition in a way that it can be a net win for all of us.
Thank you. On those words, please thank the panel, Julie, Barry, and Phill. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you.